Rome was a city of gods and giants. Its emperors were supposed to be different. They were meant to descend from heroes or ancient kings. They were supposed to have the blood of gods flowing through their veins. Power was not something you earned. It was something you inherited. The Julio-Claudian dynasty had ruled for a century. They were the descendants of Augustus, who himself was the heir of the divine Julius Caesar. Their names echoed with destiny: Tiberius, Caligula, Claudius, Nero. These were men born to the purple. They were the center of the world, and the world revolved around them. But the world was changing. The old certainties were crumbling. The divine bloodline had run its course, ending in madness and self-destruction. The Roman people were tired of emperors who treated the empire as their personal playground. They were weary of the endless extravagance, the cruelty, and the instability. They longed for something solid, something real. They needed a leader who understood the struggles of ordinary life, not one who lived in a golden palace, detached from the reality of his people. The idea of an emperor coming from the common stock of Italy was almost unthinkable. It was a revolutionary concept. Into this void stepped a man no one saw coming. His name was Titus Flavius Vespasianus. He was not born in a palace. His family tree did not boast gods or legendary founders of Rome. Instead, his grandfather was a humble tax collector from the countryside. His father had been a minor official, respectable but far from the glittering circles of power in the capital. Vespasian was a man of the people, with a gruff voice, a plain face, and hands that were more familiar with the grip of a sword than the touch of silk. He was the ultimate outsider, a man who had to fight for every scrap of recognition he ever received. This is the story of how that man, against all odds, rose to become the master of the Roman world. It is a tale of grit, determination, and an unwavering refusal to surrender to fate. Vespasian's journey was not paved with gold or privilege. It was a hard, dusty road filled with obstacles, betrayals, and moments where a lesser man would have simply given up. He was not a glamorous hero from a myth. He was a soldier, a manager, and a survivor. His story proves that in Rome, even when the old world is burning, a new one can rise from the ashes, forged not by birthright, but by character. The year 68 AD was a year of chaos. The reign of Nero, the last of the Julio-Claudians, had ended in a storm of rebellion and suicide. The golden boy of Rome, the artist emperor, had left behind a power vacuum that threatened to tear the empire apart. Without a clear heir, power belonged to whoever was strong enough to seize it. The legions, once the loyal servants of the state, now realized they held the key. They could make emperors, and just as easily they could unmake them. The ensuing period would be known as the Year of the Four Emperors. The first to claim the throne was Galba, a stern old governor from Spain. He marched on Rome, promising discipline and reform, but refused to pay soldiers their bonuses, which quickly made him enemies. The Praetorian Guard turned on him. He was cut down in the Roman Forum, his reign lasting only a few months. The city was once again plunged into uncertainty and fear. The dream of a peaceful transition was shattered. Power was a revolving door, and the price of entry was blood. Next came Otho. Otho, a former friend of Nero who'd conspired to kill Galba. He was charming and popular, but his claim was challenged by Vitellius. Vitellius, commander of the legions on the Rhine. Armies meant to defend the frontiers were now turned against each other. Roman soldiers prepared to kill Romans. The battle was brutal. Thousands died. Otho, defeated, chose suicide rather than prolong the bloodshed. Vitellius entered Rome as a conqueror. His reign was marked by gluttony and excess, feasts and extravagance while the empire bled. The treasury was emptied and soldiers ran riot through the streets. The people watched in horror as their city was consumed by violence and their leaders behaved like vultures fighting over a carcass. The empire was adrift, battered by its own storm. It seemed Rome itself was on the verge of collapse, its foundations cracking under the weight of ambition and civil war. Far from the chaos engulfing Rome, a different kind of man was waging a different kind of war. Vespasian was in Judea, on the eastern edge of the empire. He was not plotting to seize power. He was doing his job. He had been sent by Nero himself on a difficult and thankless mission to crush a major rebellion among the Jewish people. Judea was a notoriously difficult province, a hornet's nest of fierce resistance, religious fervour. Previous governors had failed spectacularly. One had even lost a legionary eagle, a symbol of ultimate Roman shame. Vespasian was not the emperor's first choice, chosen because he was reliable, experienced, and not seen as a political threat. He was a seasoned general, tough and methodical, who had learned his trade in the cold, damp forests of Britain and the rugged hills of Germany. He was in his late 50s, a veteran who had worked his way up through sheer competence rather than family connections. While the aristocrats in Rome played their dangerous games of politics, Vespasian was in the field with his soldiers, sharing their rations, marching alongside them, earning their loyalty through sweat and shared hardship. He approached the war in Judea with a practical mindset. There were no flashy, risky maneuvers. Instead, he implemented a slow, grinding strategy of attrition. He systematically isolated and conquered rebel strongholds one by one, cutting off their supply lines and wearing them down with relentless pressure. His soldiers, hardened veterans of many campaigns, respected him for it. They saw a commander who did not ask them to take risks he would not take himself. As news of the chaos in Rome reached the eastern armies, Galba's death, Otho's suicide, Vitellius's disastrous rule, the soldiers began to look at their own general in a new light. They saw the contrast between the corrupt, short-lived emperors in the capital and the solid, capable commander who led them. They had a leader who was worthy of power. They had a man who could restore order. The legions in Judea, and soon others in Egypt and Syria, began to whisper a new name. They began to see a solution to Rome's crisis. The hope for the empire, it turned out, would not come from the palaces of Rome, but from a dusty campaign tent in the east. To understand the man, you must first understand his roots. Vespasian was not born into the celebrated aristocracy of Rome. He hailed from Reate, a quiet rural town in the Sabine hills, far from the marble halls of power. The Flavians were respectable, but utterly unremarkable. People the Roman elite would barely notice. His grandfather, Titus Flavius Petro, fought on the losing side of a civil war and fled. He later worked as a debt collector. Debt collecting, necessary but distasteful to elites. A world away from grand senatorial titles and inherited estates. This was the soil the future emperor sprang from. His father, Titus Flavius Sabinus, climbed a little higher socially. He worked as a customs official. He later became a successful moneylender in Asia Minor. He was famed for honesty. Cities put up statues. to an honest tacksman. Still, that background offered no special advantages in Roman politics. Vespasian and his brother Sabinus lacked the web of powerful connections. They had no famous ancestors to invoke. They had no vast family fortune to bankroll ambitions. Vespasian's early life was shaped by practical, no-nonsense countryside values. His grandmother Tertulla was a major influence. She owned an estate at Cosa. Vespasian stayed deeply attached and returned often to his simple childhood home. He never forgot where he came from. Even as emperor, he spoke with a rustic accent and told earthy jokes. He was not ashamed. His humble roots became his strength. This lack of privilege meant his path was not guaranteed. For senatorial sons, public service was a birthright. For Vespasian, it was a mountain to be climbed. Every step had to be earned through hard work, competence, and a stubborn refusal to be outmatched. He couldn't rely on a famous name to open doors. He couldn't count on inherited wealth to bail him out of trouble. All he had was his own grit, a sharp mind, the relentless drive of a man proving himself every single day. His journey was the ultimate long shot. Vespasian's entry into public life was far from glorious. It was his older brother Sabinus who was the more ambitious of the two. Sabinus eagerly pursued a senatorial career. Vespasian initially showed little interest. He seemed content with a less demanding life, perhaps as a simple military officer. His mother, Vespasia Polla, insisted he seek office. He reluctantly put on the toga with the broad purple stripe of senatorial rank. His mother came from a slightly more distinguished family and taunted him into public life. This was not a story of innate, burning ambition. His first steps in the political arena were awkward and unpromising. He secured a junior military post in Thrace. Later, he became a quaestor, an official in charge of public finances. He was assigned to Crete. He was assigned to Cyrene. These postings were not prestigious. They were quiet backwaters, far from the center of action. He performed adequately, but without distinction. Nothing in these years hinted he would one day rule the world. He was one of many young men from the Italian provinces trying to make a name. His career continued at a slow, unremarkable pace. He was elected aedile, responsible for public buildings and games. He performed so poorly, he earned a public rebuke from Emperor Caligula. Caligula, in theatrical anger over the streets, ordered soldiers to fill Vespasian's toga with mud. It was a humiliating public spectacle. For many, this would have crushed the spirit. For Vespasian, it was another obstacle. He endured the embarrassment. He cleaned the mud from his toga. He kept going. He learned a harsh lesson about the unpredictability of imperial power. His marriage was practical and unglamorous. He married Flavia Domitilla. She was the daughter of a clerk from a provincial town. She was not a full Roman citizen until a court declared her so. For an aspiring senator, this was a modest match, not a powerful alliance. The marriage was solid and produced 3 children who became central to his story: Titus, Domitian, a daughter also named Domitilla. His family life and career were built on practicality and resilience, not high society glamour. Vespasian's reputation for being a bit rough around the edges followed him throughout his career. His plain-spoken manner and lack of polish made him an easy target for the sophisticated wits of the capital. A story circulated about his time in the retinue of the Emperor Caligula. While traveling, Vespasian was supposedly in charge of the mules that pulled the imperial baggage train. He was so lax in his duties, the story goes, that the emperor's journey was delayed. This earned him the nickname the Muleteer, a mocking reminder of his perceived clumsiness and rustic background. It was a label meant to stick, to define him as a country bumpkin, unfit for the higher echelons of power. This reputation was not entirely undeserved. Vespasian lacked the refined grace of the Roman nobility. He did not excel at flattery or the intricate dance of court politics. He was a man of action, more comfortable in a legionary camp than in a gilded salon. While others honed their speeches and schemed in the corridors of the Senate, Vespasian was building a different kind of resume. He was learning how to lead men, how to manage supplies, and how to win battles. These were skills that the snobbish elite often overlooked, but they were the very skills that Rome would desperately need in the years to come. His big break finally came with the invasion of Britain in 43 AD under the Emperor Claudius. This was a major military undertaking, and Claudius needed competent, experienced commanders he could trust. Vespasian was given command of the 2nd Legion Augusta. Here, far from the sneering politicians of Rome, he could finally prove his worth. In the damp, foggy landscape of southern Britain, he excelled. He was no longer the clumsy official or the butt of imperial jokes. He was a general in his element, leading his men from the front, fighting in over 30 battles and capturing more than 20 native hill forts. His success in Britain did not go unnoticed. He earned triumphal ornaments, a high military honor, and 2 priesthoods. More importantly, he won the respect of his soldiers and the attention of powerful figures at court who valued competence over pedigree. He had demonstrated his loyalty and his military prowess in one of the toughest campaigns of the era. The man once mocked as a muleteer had proven he could lead one of Rome's elite legions to victory after victory. He was still a long way from the throne, but he had finally stepped out of the shadows. The slow, grinding climb had begun in earnest. The 2 armies converged near the town of Bedriacum in northern Italy. This was the very same ground where Otho's forces had been defeated by Vitellius's army just months earlier. The place was heavy with the memory of recent civil war, a grim reminder of the cost of Roman fighting Roman. Antonius Primus, leading the vanguard of the Flavian forces, pushed his men hard, eager to force a battle before the main Vitellian army could fully assemble and fortify its position. His commanders urged caution, advising him to wait for Mucianus and the rest of the legions. But Primus was not a man who listened to calls for caution. He trusted in speed, aggression, and the fighting spirit of his Danubian troops. The battle began in the late afternoon of October 24th, 69 AD. It started not as a planned engagement, but as a chaotic series of skirmishes between cavalry units that quickly escalated into a full-scale legionary battle. The fighting was savage and desperate. These were not foreign enemies. They were fellow Romans, trained in the same tactics, wielding the same weapons. The lines crashed together with a terrifying sound of steel and shouting. For hours, neither side could gain a clear advantage. The Vitellians, fighting for their emperor and their recent victory, were determined not to yield. The Flavians, fueled by a desire for revenge and the promise of a new order, pushed forward relentlessly. As dusk fell, the battle should have ended. But this was no ordinary battle. Driven by a bitter hatred, the soldiers fought on into the darkness, under the faint light of the moon. The confusion was immense. Soldiers struggled to recognize friend from foe, identifying each other by their battle cries. It was a brutal, grinding affair, a test of pure endurance and will. The turning point came with a strange and unexpected event. The moon rose, full and bright. but it rose behind the Flavian lines. The backlight made Vespasian's troops visible. It cast long shadows and shone into the faces of the Vitellians, silhouetting the Flavians and making them seem larger, more menacing. Primus seized the moment. He rallied his exhausted men, pointed toward the rising sun to come, and shouted it was a sign of support from the gods of the east. Inspired, the Danubian legions launched one final desperate charge. At the same time, a legion that had once served in Syria recognized a Vitellian unit and turned its siege engines on them. The combined assault broke the Vitellian line. They wavered, then shattered, fleeing in disarray back towards their fortified camp. The Flavians had won a major victory, but the night's bloody work was far from over. The defeated Vitellian soldiers did not scatter. Instead, they retreated to their heavily fortified camp. Then they fell back into the nearby city of Cremona. They were beaten but not broken, and they prepared to make a stand. Antonius Primus knew that if he gave them time to rest and regroup, the war could drag on. He made a ruthless decision. Despite the exhaustion of his own men, who had been fighting for a day and a night, he ordered an immediate assault on the city. The Flavian soldiers' bloodlust surged. They were spurred on by the promise of plunder. They eagerly followed. Cremona was seen not as a city of fellow Italians, but as the enemy's treasury. The assault was furious. The Flavians used every piece of siege equipment they could find. They built makeshift shelters and siege ramps. They manned battering rams to smash the defences. The defenders answered with equal ferocity. They hurled stones, they rained fire down on the attackers. The battle raged for hours, every wall and gate contested. Finally, the relentless pressure of the Flavian legions proved too much. They broke through the defences and swarmed into the streets of Cremona. What followed was not a battle, but a massacre and a horrifying sack. The discipline of the victorious army completely collapsed. For 4 days, the city of Cremona was subjected to unspeakable horrors. The soldiers, a mix of Danubian legionaries and barbarian auxiliaries, joined the fury. They slaughtered soldiers. They slaughtered civilians alike. They looted homes. They looted temples. They set fires that consumed much of the wealthy city. It was one of the most brutal episodes in Rome's long history of civil wars. A stark display of the savagery that lay just beneath the surface of Roman civilization. Antonius Primus, the man who had unleashed this fury, was either unable or unwilling to stop it. The city that had the misfortune of being the site of Vitellius's last stand was utterly destroyed. A grim monument to the cost of one man's ambition. When news of the sack of Cremona spread through Italy, it sent a shockwave of terror across the peninsula. It was a brutal but effective message. Resistance to Vespasian's cause was futile. Cities that had been loyal to Vitellius now rushed to declare their allegiance to the Flavians. While Vespasian sat in Alexandria, projecting an image of a reluctant saviour bringing peace and order, his generals were winning his empire for him through sheer terror. The road to Rome was now open, but it was a road paved with the ashes of an Italian city and the blood of its people. With the destruction of Cremona, the war was all but over. The remaining Vitellian forces melted away, and their emperor, Vitellius, was captured in Rome. He was dragged through the streets, publicly tortured, and his body was unceremoniously thrown into the Tiber River. The final bloody act of the year of the 4 emperors had concluded. Vespasian, still in Alexandria, was now the undisputed master of the Roman world. He had not set foot in Italy, nor had he fought a single battle in the civil war himself. His victory had been won by his sons, his allies, and the overwhelming momentum of a movement that saw him as the only hope for stability. The man from the countryside had finally reached the pinnacle of power. His arrival in Rome in the summer of 70 AD was not a triumphant entry in the mould of a traditional conqueror. He was not a charismatic youth like Augustus, nor a flamboyant figure like Nero. He was a 60-year-old man with a wrinkled face, a gruff demeanour, and a reputation for being careful with money. The Roman people, exhausted by a year of bloodshed, extravagance and chaos, welcomed him not as a god, but as a long-overdue solution. They saw in his plainness and practicality a promise of an end to the madness. They needed a manager, a restorer, someone to put the broken pieces of the empire back together. Vespasian was exactly the man for the job. He immediately set about his work with the same methodical determination he had shown in his military campaigns. His first priority was to restore order and financial stability. The imperial treasury was empty, bankrupted by Nero's excesses and the subsequent civil wars. Vespasian was famously, and sometimes comically, frugal. He introduced new taxes, revised old ones, and cut down on lavish public spending. He was not afraid to be unpopular in his quest to balance the books. He famously declared that money does not stink after imposing a tax on public latrines. It was this practical, no-nonsense approach that slowly began to refill Rome's coffers and put the state on a solid financial footing once more. Vespasian also understood the importance of propaganda and legitimacy. To secure his rule and that of his sons, he needed to establish the idea of a new dynasty, the Flavians. He controlled the historical narrative, presenting his rise not as a military coup, but as the destiny of a man chosen to save Rome. He began a massive building program, clearing away the ruins of the civil war and Nero's grandiose Golden House. In its place, he began construction on new public buildings for the people, the most famous of which would be a grand amphitheatre, a place for public entertainment. This structure, later known as the Colosseum, was a powerful symbol. It was built for the Roman people on land that Nero had taken for his own private pleasure. Vespasian's reign, which lasted for a decade, was a period of peace and restoration. He proved to be as skilled an administrator as he had been a general. He put the legions back to work, not fighting each other, but defending the frontiers, building roads, building infrastructure. He reformed the Senate, appointing new men from the provinces, the Italian countryside, men like himself, whose loyalty was based on merit rather than ancient family names. This broadened the base of Roman government, making it more representative of the empire as a whole. He was a stabilizer, a man who healed the wounds of civil war through hard work and common sense. He brought a sense of normalcy back to a world that had been on the brink of collapse. His greatest achievement was arguably the establishment of a new, stable dynasty. By naming his two sons, Titus and Domitian, as his heirs, he provided a clear line of succession, ending the cycle of chaos that had followed Nero's death. When Vespasian died of natural causes in 79 AD, a rare feat for a Roman emperor, power passed peacefully to his beloved son, Titus. This seamless transition was a testament to the stability he had forged. His last words were reportedly a joke. Vai, puto Deus fio. Oh dear, I think I'm becoming a god. He faced his own mortality with the same pragmatism with which he had lived his life. The story of Vespasian is more than just the tale of another emperor. It is the ultimate underdog story, a powerful testament to the idea that leadership can be earned, not just inherited. He was a man who rose from almost nothing, whose career was marked by setbacks, humiliations, and moments where anyone else would have quit. Mocked as a muleteer, pelted with turnips, fell asleep in front of a murderous emperor. Yet he endured. He outworked, outlasted, outmaneuvered his rivals, not through brilliant flashes of genius, but through slow, grinding, relentless determination. He was the embodiment of grit. His legacy is etched in the stones of Rome and in the very fabric of its history. He proved that the empire could be ruled by someone other than a blue-blooded aristocrat from one of the founding families. He showed that competence, experience, and character were more valuable than a famous name. Vespasian's rise from the Sabine Hills to the Palatine Hill was a message to all who felt like outsiders. The path may be hard, the climb may be steep, but with unwavering resolve, even a muleteer can become a master of the world. He found Rome in ruins and left it on the road to recovery, leaving a dynasty that would rule for a generation and a story that continues to inspire.